Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening. We had a workshop, and it was on fees and fines in yard waste, the yard waste facilities, and council rules and regulations. And we'll talk about that later this evening. I'd like to officially thank everybody for being here and call to order the approval of the minutes for last week, or last 2 weeks ago. And do we have any discussion? Seeing no discussion, do we have a motion? Ron, thank you. Bob, second. Thank you. All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda. Thank you. Next item is public discussion. Oh, excuse me, manager's report. I'm sorry. Sorry, Bill.
That's okay, Tom.
That's
That's
okay,
okay. Not the first time. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few things, just to bring the council up to speed a little bit. The chair and I have been working with the Cumberland County CDBG committee to try to pull together a grant for a veteran to veterans program that I think is really important. I think possibly under new business, Mr. Chair, you may ask the council for their endorsement of that program from the town of Cumberland. It is CDBG money, as you know, comes from the federal government. There's a committee that's represented countywide. Our chair is the chair of that again this year. And we believe it's a very important program. About 80 veterans are represented by this program. It provides and connects people with different types of social services, and it provides a safety net for a lot of veterans. I will try to get Susan Golden here if you'd like. She could give you a presentation, but we're not looking for funding, we're looking for support. And your support would be very impactful to this whole operation. So you'll hear that again from the chair tonight at probably under new business, Tom. So
I will, yes.
I think it's a very well worthwhile program. If you remember Sue Gold, she was our first AIP coordinator, our aging in place coordinator. She did a phenomenal job. She's just an awesome lady, and I'd encourage you to think hard about it. And again, if you want her to come in to talk to you about this, we'd love to bring her in. I'm sure she'd love to talk about it as well. Secondly, I just want to talk about the Route 9 improvement project. There is some confusion with the language. It could be a lot simpler. Essentially, when the DOT does major capital improvements to any road, there is a moratorium put on a road. And it basically is that you're not supposed to cut into that road. It used to be 5 years. I think it's 3 years now. And what that means is that if you have to go in and connect to the water line or the sewer line or the gas line or a drain line, you will incur a significant repair cost. Typically, a trench is just replaced and repaired as, you know, the width of a trench. With a moratorium cut, it's typically anywhere from 50 to 100 feet each side of the trench, and it's curb to curb. That means all the pavement has to get ground up to 1 inch deep, and you have to widen out the trench repair, and everything 100 to 200 feet in length now gets new pavement. And this is primarily done so that it discourages those cuts, but it also gives the trench patch, if you will, kind of a longer period and a smoother transition to the trench. We have one just like that on Tuttle Road right near Christmas Tree Farm. They did that this summer. I think they did a great job in the patch and the repair. We will tell over time if it's successful, but it prevents the bump that everybody sees. So that's what that's about. It's not anything other than warning people that if you have to cut into Route 9 from around Turkey Lane all the way to the Falmouth line, now's the time to do it. Try to get your contractors lined up for early summer. I expect them to be here in late July to late August in that time frame. So you have a few months in early spring to get that stuff done if you want to get connected to whatever utility is out there. For the most part, there's really no utilities until you get closer to Turkey Lane. The gas and the water are pretty much between Wynn Road and Tuttle Road, but everything else is, after that, is pretty much just road and maybe a couple of drain pipes. So that's what that was about, and that's all I have for this evening.
Thank you very much for that manager's report, Bill. I do appreciate it. Anything else? You sure? Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay, next item. Next item is, any questions of the town manager?
Allison has
I have
one.
two quick ones.
Go,
hopefully.
go for it.
Just a follow-up, Bill, on two things. Kind of, one was, well, they both were two things that came to light that I think were kind of gaps in our, I'll call them system, if you will. One was kind of when kind of law enforcement in its law enforcement capacity, that's not where we need support. It's either in mediation or in a different type of capacity that we didn't really have a way to fulfill that service. And I know that was something we kind of brought to light, but I just wanted to circle back and just kind of see where your head was at, where Chief Rumsey, and kind of where those conversations had gone, were going. And then two was around the harassment warning, where I know Chief Rumsey came and gave a very thoughtful explanation as far as his policy at the time. But I think what also came to light was kind of its inconsistency with surrounding communities. And so I'm just looking for an update on that and kind of where we were, because I know that, again, there were also some additional conversations around that.
Yeah, it was really difficult for me in many cases to put my head around that in a small town. I think we are a community that really thrives on community policing and thrives in a way that we want our police officers to feel comfortable, I would say, kind of in a mediation role, and not discourage it, but encourage it, because a lot of times with our involvement, it may avoid another set of circumstances that could be totally avoided. So when I explained that to Chief Rumsey, I think he saw a totally different light and a different spin on it. You got to remember, this is somebody that came from Waterville, and Waterville and Cumberland are very, very different, very, very different. So his department there basically couldn't deal with a lot of the harassment type of orders that kind of inundated them at times. So he took another look at that. He agreed with me in a sense that, and he was always supportive of community policing, but the mediation part of it, I think maybe got missed in the translation. He is looking back at that harassment piece and trying to decide, where can we help and where can we be a better resource. He has reached out even to the county to let the council know to see if they would consider some type of officer on staff that might have some mediation skills, if not some skills related to working with people with mental illnesses, because that's another one of the pieces that we even see here in Cumberland quite a bit. And we're not adequately trained to deal with a lot of those things. So I think through those conversations that we've had with the community, I think it was pretty clear that that was something that might have slid through the cracks and that we're working on. So he is developing new internal policies. I don't know if he's completed that yet, but I will share with you that because of those meetings, things have changed. And we will be more proactive than reactive in those situations whenever possible.
Thank you.
And thanks for following up with that. I appreciate that.
Shirley, you had a question?
No,
for the
I
manager?
was just
Oh,
wanted you
okay,
to see
okay,
Allison.
thanks. Okay, next item is public discussion. Public discussion is for comments on items that are not on the agenda. Comments are limited to 5 minutes per person. Rebuttal comments will be limited to 2 minutes. Public discussion topics will be brought up again under new business for further council discussion. Do we have anybody from the public? Bill? We have a road named after Bill Stiles, just in case just need to notice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bill Stiles from Range Road, Cumberland, Maine, not to be confused with Cumberland, Rhode Island, Cumberland, Connecticut, etc. Mr. Chairman, Town Council, Mr. Shane, town employees, and Cumberland residents, I want to publicly thank you for the honors bestowed on me. I also want to thank you for the kindness bestowed on me and my family and my wife Joy's passing. It was really appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Anybody else? Sean?
Sean McBride from Cumberland, Chairperson Gruber, thanks for the opportunity to speak. As we look at what's happening in the country to the First Amendment rights of conservatives being selectively eliminated by public and private social media companies, right now it's a total war on hypocrisy. 7 months of peaceful protests from BLM and Antifa, in which cities were held hostage, set on fire, businesses looted, people injured, many killed, including over a dozen police officers. No one condemns this action of a few, but liberalism is a one-way street. The hypocrisy of the occupation of the government offices for days during the Supreme Court hearings of Judge Kavanaugh in 2018 has been largely forgotten. We have a microcosm of wokeness occurring here in Cumberland, North Yarmouth, using gender and race relations as a subversion for totalitarian actions against local, state, and national governments and its citizens. Anne Maximowicz, a parent supporter of socialism, anarchism, and Marxism, who did not stand for the Pledge of Allegiance to honor the American flag or the troops fighting for our freedoms, is the same person who is on the MSCD 51 Equity and Inclusion Committee and School Board, recently decided to turn her attacks toward a member of the Cumberland Town Council. You see, the progressive left wants to lash out at anyone they can, and their hatred is real, but generally their facts are weak. It's called selective outrage culture. Folks like Anne Maximowicz, Tyler McGinley, Kate Perrin, Nick Schuler-Wiston, Superintendent Jeff Porter are all in a war with conservatism because they're afraid that many citizens simply won't put up with their hypocrisy. They also don't want to allow the First Amendment rights of citizens as currently stated in the Constitution and are legally withholding or willing to withhold those rights if it means to silence your dissenting opinion. They claim they want equity and inclusion, but really they want to silence the opposition. Same approach Superintendent Jeff Porter did on 6/2 when he sent out his letter to the community, effectively stating any student at Gurley should be ashamed of their color of their skin or their hardworking parents. White privilege, he said. 400 years of oppression, he said. As a reminder to all, he's done nothing to heal the town of this horrific letter in 6 months since. He's also skipped out on 2 requests to meet and talk about these in person and devise a real plan to move forward. Selective outrage culture is what I've also experienced from a member of the town council, as their comments were placed on a Facebook group called Anti-Racist Organizing for Cumberland, North Yarmouth. It's a private Facebook group, which means they can selectively let people in or ban others from actually seeing the page. It's run by Anne Maximowicz and Eliza Batchelder. Anne still doesn't understand what she's doing is advancing her own personal agenda, which is illegal. Tax dollars have been put to great use by Superintendent Jeff Porter, who has billable hours to Drummond and Woodson in the range of $40,000 just to fight full requests for transparency, school choice, following their own rules on public comment, and requests for fiscal responsibility. As a side note, my taxes have gone up 76% in 20 years. Some of that's valuation changes, but a bunch of it's compounded interest, 3 to 5% approved school budgets year after year after year. No one in the town has ever told the school board no. It's time to do so in June. He's also looking for you to buy thousands of dollars of acres of a parcel of land next to Grilly so they can put a $40 million school on it. Eliza Batchelor can't comprehend why I have not been served a harassment order, except of course the fact I've not harassed anyone. I've broken no laws, have no criminal record, and have been an exemplary citizen for the last 20 years. Concept of due process in the law seems difficult for progressive leftists to understand. The opening question to join that Facebook group: what example of white privilege do you see in Cumberland and North Yarmouth? Don't think for a second that members of this town council and members of the town government are not going to be implicated with claims of racism. They're stockpiling a list of white privilege issues to come after you with. Most likely all are false, but let's not let the facts get in the way of cancel culture. Chairman Gruber, could you please ask Councillor Foster, who is working on social justice discussions for the town, to publicly define institutional racism, please?
I will under further discussion with the
Thank you.
council.
We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this topic through critical race theory at Greeley and time drains on the Cumberland Town officials when we could be working on more locally relevant topics. What a complete waste of time and money. I want to leave you with two quotes. Candace Owens, one of my favorite voices. Keep believing evil white conservatives want to bring harm to you while the actual evil white racist progressives continue to destroy your life. And from Ronald Reagan, if fascism comes to America, it will come in the name of liberalism. It's already here. It's in the school board, it's in our town, and it's in this room. And until folks push back, you're going to live with the consequences. I'm going to continue to push back within my rights and legally. I'm hoping more Cumberland and North Yarmouth residents do the same. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else? Public discussion? Okay, seeing none, I will close public discussion. First item under legislation and policy is to hear a report from Tax Assessor John Brushwein for reference 2023 reevaluation. John?
I am going to need that. Good evening. Typically, we have this conversation about the assessment ratio in the spring of the year. Obviously, last year was not a typical year, although what I will say about it is from a market standpoint, the real estate market has never been stronger. I think we're looking at values now that are similar to the market that occurred back in 2000 and 2005.
John, can you pick that microphone up so they can hear you a little better?
Certainly. I'll lean forward a little. So one thing I did briefly before this meeting this afternoon is look at the 2020 sales, meaning calendar year beginning January 1st through December 31st of 2020. And just to give you an idea, approximately 24% of those sales were to non-Maine property buyers, which is a pretty high amount. But getting on with the topic, statutory requirements in the state of Maine, assessors are required to conduct an annual sales ratio study. That is then audited by the state, and the assessment standards that the towns are required to meet are a minimum assessment ratio of 70%, and that is the ratio of assessed value to market value, a maximum assessment ratio of 110%, and a maximum level of assessment quality of 20, which is also referred to as the quality rating. And the quality rating refers to the uniformity of the assessments. The lower your quality rating is, the more uniform your property assessments are, the more equitable they are. So the purpose of the ratio study annually is to measure and evaluate the level of assessment uniformity, to assist in judging if the statutory requirements are being met by the municipality. And lastly, the certified assessment ratio is used to adjust every municipal assessed valuation to 100% of fair market value on an annual basis, which is then used as part of the formula to determine state aid for education. It's also used for your state revenue sharing, and it's used to determine your share of the county budget. So just to go over some of these definitions, the assessment ratio is the assessed value divided by the sale price. The average ratio is the average of all assessment ratios in the central 70% of the sales ratio study. The reason that's the central 70% is the top 15 and the bottom 15% are dropped for the ratio analysis portion to do away with any outliers. The deviation is the difference between the individual ratio and the average assessed ratio. And the average deviation is the average of all the deviations in the study. And then again, the quality rating is the average deviation divided by the average ratio. So if you've got a property assessed at $300,000, sells for $400,000, then the assessment ratio is 75%. If the developed parcel ratio in total was 77%, then the deviation is 77 minus the 75, or 2%, and that is done for each of the sales in the sample. And then the quality rating is the average deviation divided by the average ratio. In this case, it would be 11. Obviously, that 20 is the maximum. 11 is very good. When you get down in numbers in the below 10, then one of two things has happened. Either you're chasing sales, or you've got a very homogeneous neighborhood where you've got a lot of properties that are similar, and therefore it's easier to keep that ratio similar.
John, is that 77%, is that from the state?
That will be the certified ratio as assessed by the state.
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
But we're going to get on to some ratio analysis that are going to come on further in this discussion that'll clear that up for you. So the certified ratio is the overall ratio between the assessed value and market value for all property in the municipality as determined by main revenue. Again, that comes back to I get audited annually. We both do a sales ratio analysis. They come up with a certified ratio, and then that is the certified ratio as determined by the department. The declared ratio is the overall ratio of assessed value to market value as determined by the municipality within 10% of the certified ratio. By law, municipalities can declare a ratio within 10% of that certified ratio. So for 2020, and I'm talking calendar year 2020, the average ratio in the town was 90%. We declared 99%, which if you looked at your tax bill this year, you'll notice that your homestead exemption went down. And that's because the declared ratio has to be applied to all your exemptions, homestead, veterans, and it also has to be applied to current use values. So if you got your property in tree growth, annually the state sends out tree growth rates. Those all have to be adjusted again by that declared ratio. So again, I'm going to refer to calendar years as opposed to fiscal year. For calendar year 2021, which is the year we are entering now, the combined assessment ratio is 86%. Up at the top, you'll see that that analysis says 7/18 to 6/19. That is the sale period that is used for determination of the 2021 state valuation. The reason for that is twofold. One, the state has to audit close to 500 municipal entities on an annual basis. There's also an appeal period, and they also have to have this information for those calculations for state aid for education, revenue sharing in the county. So in West Cumberland, I've stratified these basically just by location. West Cumberland, the average ratio is 88% with a quality rating of 8. Cumberland Center was 85% with a quality rating of 10. Cumberland Foreside was 88% with a quality rating of 12. I think the one that you got in paper said 6, but it was actually 12 for Cumberland Foreside. And then condominiums were at 84% with a quality rating of 11. If you look at that from a standpoint of assessment uniformity, they're all fairly close. The ratios are all fairly close. So it indicates a pretty good uniformity in the assessments. The 2022 sales ratio analysis, and this has not been audited by the state, it will be audited this year, but this is my analysis, and it's pretty much always been hand in hand. The combined assessment ratio's gone to 83%. West Cumberland's 86% with a quality rating of 9. Cumberland Center's 81% with a quality rating of 13. Cumberland Center has exploded from a valuation standpoint. The houses that were the 1970s built local in-town houses that were average construction, good quality houses, but on small lots, the price has gone right through the roof because they are now the affordable house. Cumberland Foreside, the average ratio is 84% with a quality rating of 12. And again, if you look at those quality ratings with the Foreside, you've got waterfront properties, you've got non-waterfront properties, and then you've got water influence properties. And water influence properties, there have been a number of sales. And when I say water influence, they can be influenced either by view or deeded right-of-way to the shore, or in some cases down in is it Pine? Down in that development down there, they've got a tennis court that is shared. But those values have really gone up substantially, which is why that quality rating is creeping up down in that area. And then condominiums were 85% with a quality rating of 9, still relatively the same. But now, this is the calendar year sales ratio analysis that I did just recently. The combined is now at 75%, and this is January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2020. West Cumberland average ratio has dropped to 78% with a quality rating of 11. Cumberland Center has dropped to 75%, again with a quality rating of 12. Foreside 76 with a quality rating of 13, and the condominiums have dropped to 74% with a quality rating of 11. Again, from a uniformity standpoint, it's in fairly good shape, but that ratio obviously is dropping fast now. So in 2020, the median residential sale price statewide was $270,000. That is based on the article in the Portland Press Herald in November. Cumberland Center's median, the median being the central point halfway in the study, is $425,500. Cumberland Foreside's median is $680,000, and West Cumberland's $382,500. So my 2020 study, the overall ratio is now 75%. Quality rating of 13, which is the high end, indicates that it's starting to get a little less uniform. We're still in fairly good shape, but from a ratio standpoint, we're going to be below 70 soon. So just to go back, in 2018, we did what was called a property inventory update. And when I came to work for the town, first in Cumberland, the end of 2016, and into 17, I discovered that there were a lot of errors in some cases, omissions in some cases, and inconsistencies. So in 2018, we did the property inventory update. At that time, we changed over 2,300 values, property values. Some positive, some negative, but resulting in a change of $22.5 million in assessed value. But those changes, as I said, were to correct issues that were incorrect, to correct inconsistencies, and pick up those things that had been omitted. No valuation schedules were changed at that time. A lot of people I've had, not a lot, but I've had people come in and they said, oh yeah, you just did a revaluation. And I said, no, that's not what we did. What we did is we updated our data, which is what we did. Since the last revaluation, which your last full revaluation was 2008, obviously building costs have skyrocketed, especially recently. Land prices have also increased, and you've had changes in neighborhood values too. And those all have to be addressed. So revaluation, the goal of any revaluation is to have your assessment ratio, your certified ratio at 100%. And that's to have all properties as close to 100% as possible. Revaluation does not raise new tax dollars. I've been doing this for 37 years now, and I've been through more revaluations than I would care to live through. But people often ask me, well, what are you going to do with the additional revenue? There is no additional revenue. The purpose of the revaluation is to equalize values, and that's it. So typically, and this is the rule of thumb, revaluations result in a third of taxpayers seeing an increase in taxes, a third staying the same, and a third seeing a decrease. The caveat to that is, depends on what you do with your budget in the year of your revaluation. If you have a big budget increase in your revaluation year, then everybody's going to be impacted. And the people that are on the low end of that ratio going to 100% are going to be impacted even more. Something to obviously keep in mind. So if the average ratio is 73%, then those that are at the average will see little to no change. Those below the average result in an increase, and those above the average would see a decrease. So the cost estimates for revaluation, if you were to hire this out, and I got this figure from a contractor, and actually this $302,100 figure did not include data entry. And I will tell you that when we did the last inventory update, I did all the data entry. From a standpoint of doing a complete revaluation, you're hiring an outside firm, they're coming in, they're going to do the sales ratio analysis, they're going to create the building and land valuation models, they're going to conduct field reviews to assure consistency and accuracy of the valuations, send notices out of the new values, conduct informal hearings. Informal hearings are conducted at the end of the revaluation to go over people's concerns. If there are errors that are found as a result of that, they will go back out, do re-inspections, make those changes prior to the final valuations. The time frame I'm looking at is June of 22, we would begin the revaluation. July of 23, we would finish, we would complete and have the hearings in July so that the tax bills that went out in August 2023 would represent the new values. Assessor assisted revaluation, and this is the way that I am recommending. This would be my recommendation, having been through as many as I've been through and having had companies come in and do revaluations. I, as the tax assessor for the town of Cumberland, want to have my hand in it. And in doing so, you have a better control of the process, better control of the program. So I would be involved in all aspects. I'd be involved with the sales ratio analysis, going out, and we have to re-inspect all the sales for like 3-year period to find out what the conditions of the sale were at the time, if things have changed, if improvements were made that were not part of the sale. And then we'd have to do the same thing as far as creating the new land and building schedules, the land and building model, creating depreciation schedules, and then assist with the field review of the 3,684 parcels. 3,269 are developed, to assure, again, the accuracy of the valuation model and to make sure everything is consistent. Also, it assists with the informal hearings with taxpayers and the finalization of valuations. So the cost estimate for that is $170,000. The cost of the independent company that would be assisting is actually $140,000. We've got another $30,000 in there for data entry, because that was not included. It's also going to be for mailings. We're going to have at least 3 mailings. And it's a possibility that we might hire a specialist for some of the high-end properties. And when I say high-end, I'm talking like CMP. You know, CMP is, I think, the highest taxpayer in the town of Cumberland. And the valuation of CMP's property is specialized. So we may want to look at having somebody come in to take a look at those numbers when we get to that point. So what I am suggesting and recommending is that we budget 50% of the estimated contractor assisted revaluation for fiscal year 2022, which is the fiscal year we're entering, or we will be budgeting for currently. Budget the remaining 50% in fiscal year 2023. And as I said, the revaluation will begin spring of 22 and finalized by July of 23. Any questions?
John, this does not require any motion from
No,
the council.
That's correct.
But I'm interested to see if anybody has any questions. Yes,
I
Shirley?
want to thank you for getting out in front of this and planning ahead. When that slide went up about hiring an assessor at $370,000, I was feeling a little gun shy. The last time we went to an outside contractor, we ended up a mess that you've spent 2 years, 3 years, 4 years straightening out. So I was pleased to see that your proposal is to stay with your both hands fully on the steering wheel.
Thanks, Shirley. Bob?
How do we look compared to other communities as far as keeping up with state requirements? And what is the danger of not doing a reval?
Well, obviously the one danger is if once you fall below the minimum standards, the state can take action against the municipality. I have yet to see that happen. But the second and more important part of it is that the quality rating is starting to elevate a little bit, and the main purpose of doing any revaluation from my standpoint is uniformity. We want to make sure that everybody's being treated equitably. As far as other municipalities, I know that Falmouth was considering a revaluation last year and decided not to do it. Cape Elizabeth was going to do a revaluation last year, and they also decided not to do it. And the one reason I've kind of pushed this to 2023 is, one, the ratios look okay for the next year or so, year and a half. And two, we're going to get to see what's happening with the market and see if this thing stabilizes some. Because right now, it's crazy is what it is. It's just amazing me by what properties are selling for. And if you look, obviously interest rates are at an all-time low, and inventory is at an all-time low. I looked on today, there's 5 houses in Cumberland that are for sale. There are 3 besides those 5 that are under contract, and that's it. And so what's happening is, and I know it's happened because we've seen it, there are bidding wars. I talked to someone today that was looking at buying a condo down in the Foreside and thought they were going to be paying like $415, and it ended up they had to pay $430, which was above what the actual asking price was at the time. So that's the market we're in. I think it's, with the way I've laid this out, we'll have some time to see what happens, see if the market does adjust. And if not, then we'll be ready to go with the revaluation.
Thanks, John. Any other questions?
I have another one.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bob.
So if you're in a circle of communities and you're doing a reval and the other communities are not, is there benefits statewide for education dollars, for revenue sharing? Is there any benefit to the community to stay up to date and compare ourselves with the communities around us?
Well, technically, Bob, the answer to that is no. And the reason it's no is because your valuation is being brought up to 100% annually by the state anyway, as a result of that state valuation analysis. So you're still going to be treated the same. The difference is, one, we'll get back to the equity standpoint. 2, you get the 100% of your homestead exemption, your veterans exemption, you get the 100% of the tree growth values and all the current use values.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Bob?
It's a good question.
Ron?
John, just one question. You say there's 3,684 parcels in the town of Cumberland, and there's 3,269 of them that are developed. If my math is right, that's 415 undeveloped parcels. Is that including town-owned land? And I'm just curious. I'm just trying to put a number on
Yeah.
how many lots there are in Cumberland. I mean,
I believe it is.
okay.
I believe it is.
I mean, if you look at the numbers, 415 lots that are undeveloped is really a pretty small number.
It is.
Probably,
But by the same token, you can look at some of the lots that are developed that have large acreage
right,
tracts.
right. Thank you. And
George?
John, I want to thank you for clearing up the mess that you inherited when you came here, and it was a monumental task. I happen to know that. Would you say there's any chance that we won't be below 70% in the next year, let's say?
I would doubt it, unless things change drastically. And I don't see that happening unless the change of president results in interest rates going the opposite way, but I don't see that happening either.
Yeah, when we look at the statistics as far as what you do and when Bill Shane tells us that excise taxes have been through the roof, we're a very fortunate town on a lot of levels. But there's a lot of good fortune everywhere, and there are tons of people really hurting right now. I remember having a conversation with a good friend of mine years ago, back in the early 80s. We talked about the rift between the haves and the have-nots getting wider, unacceptably wider. If we thought that was the case in those days, nobody could have predicted where we'd be at now. And I think it's a scary thing for society. We need to do something about it.
I agree.
But thank you for your good work, John.
Allison?
I just had one. So, more of what happens, how do you true up at the end, right? Just on the last slide, we're kind of doing half in 1 year. What happened, that same house, right? Markets change, and, do you do, a true up at the end, the houses you've done more recently to kind of use them as a bench, same house, if you will, you did,
Yeah.
9 months ago, market shifts, similar house you do now, is there anything in the process that kind of does a overarching?
Well, essentially that truing up comes at the end of the revaluation.
Okay.
The revaluation is going to we're going to be looking at sales from a 3-year period. As I said, we'll do an analysis on those 3 years, and that'll be right through 22 to when we start.
Okay.
So that we can then determine what that valuation model needs to be based on those sales.
Okay.
So it should be accurate
Oh,
at that time.
Got it.
Mr. Town Manager?
So, I do have a question for John, but I do want to remind the council, when we had the last revaluation done, there were a couple of things going on. We basically lost $250 million of value when Chebeague Island and 13 islands left us. And also the economy was changing, and there were things in the winds. And the 1 year that we waited, because we put off the implementation until 2008, really saved our skin, because at 2007 was the peak of the market. 2008 it came down like a ton of bricks. And had we implemented it in 2007, like some communities around us did, we would have been trying to basically cut all valuations by 10% or more, which would have been kind of a nightmare a year after you just did a reval. So I just want to remind the council that if things like you described get kind of crazy and start going the other way toward the end, there might be a reason to take a pause and wait a year to implement it. But following John's schedule, I think we have really 3 years to look at it, because we're going into the budget for FY22. This won't get implemented until the budget for FY24. Remember, September of '23 is FY24. So we have some time, and we have for time, I think, George, you were critical in the last revaluation to say, you know, time out, guys, I'm seeing some really bad things happening on the real estate market. It might be best if we took just a time out and held our breath for a year and just let it settle. And that was the best advice probably anybody gave us, because had we gone the 2007 route, it would have been a mess. It really would have been a mess. So I think your own experiences, the experience we have on the council, and the experience from just past revaluations is really important, and don't undermine that, because a lot can change in the next 2 years. John, when you talk about basically the homestead values, I mean, everybody gets $25,000. If we're down to 70%, do we get 70% of the $25,000? How does that work as a individual resident?
So, and I'm going to go back to my 2021. So for 2021, we were at 86%. And as I said, you can declare 10% above that, which is 9% essentially. So you'd be at 95% for this coming year, 2021, which brings that $25,000 homestead down to $23,750. The veterans exemption is a $6,000 exemption. Should be far more than that, in my opinion. But that would be reduced to $5,700 at 95%.
And this is directly to the individual taxpayer?
Exactly.
Not good. So when you get down to 70%, we're talking some serious numbers. We're talking almost
my
$150.
22, for my 22 sales ratio analysis, we'd be declaring 91%. So the homestead exemption would be $22,750 in 22, and the veterans would be $5,460.
So even at $3,000 less, you're still looking at $60 that you're not going to get. Yeah, if we had equitable revaluations across the board. And does that also impact our reimbursement from the state?
No.
No. So it's really the individual residents in our community are also being impacted negatively by not having a good set of values for our community. So, I mean, when you go from $25,000 at full value to 70%, that's $150 on every single property. So it's not, you know, it's serious, especially when you're looking at, you know, the tax increases we see in our community. We want to be cognizant of giving any money back that we can help, especially things that we have some control over.
Bill, I was feeling really good for a moment there. Oh, man.
No, we're good we have competent people at the wheel.
Yes, we sure are.
John has done a phenomenal job and has really kind of put a light touch on what he's actually done, but what he's done is a ton of heavy lifting. And George, I don't know if you stopped complaining about it, but it's been nice not for you to complain about it at a lot of council meetings since John's been here, and I appreciate that, because George was adamant that something was wrong and something was amiss. And when you increase the value of the town by just correcting the property cards by $22 million, that's pretty clear that something was amiss. And when it's off by that much, we're all paying for that. You know, we're all paying more than our fair share, and that's what this is all about, equity and paying our fair share. And John has done a phenomenal job in cleaning that up and, you know, making our records the way they are today. And I'm confident that this is the best way to go, when kind of it's like having the owner in the store. I mean, it's a much different feel when you have your assessor basically leading a reval than when you basically hire it out. I think in 2002 was the last contracted revaluation this town did, and that was fully outside. It was Colair and Trumbull that it did it. It was over $400,000 to the town in 2002. And can you imagine how much that would be today? And what we ended up with was something John spent almost 2 years fixing. So for me, I think we're doing it the right way. And this will come up, Tom, more in the budget meetings, but I'd encourage the council to write down their questions. If you hear questions from residents, get right back to John, because he's right on top of this, and he's done a phenomenal job for us and continues to do quality work like this.
John, without a doubt, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
And I want to say thank you for taking this job, because before you came here, we couldn't understand what was going on. Seriously, I mean, you have made it so much simpler. I mean, when we had the gentleman from the state, and I don't think it was his doing, I mean, it was mind-boggling. For you to have stepped in and taken this job, you've stepped into a minefield, and you've done a phenomenal job. I want you to know that. I mean, and I really appreciate it, so,
Agreed, John. I agree.
thank you.
We never told them what was behind the curtain, unfortunately.
Don't go behind the curtain.
Thanks, Ron. The next item is to consider and act on forwarding to the planning board for a public hearing and recommendation, a zone request change from Michael Record and Andrew Hagerty, excuse me, to the change, a portion of Map U20, Lot 66, from the VCC to the VOC zone as recommended by the Ordinance Committee. Mr. Town Manager, not here.
Yep, he's up at the.
I'm at the podium, Mr. Chair.
Oh, there
Sorry
you
to
are.
move around on you there.
Didn't even notice you there, Bill.
Yeah, unfortunately, my maps got messed up a little bit. So what I wanted to explain to you can be quickly described in maybe this one map, and I just want to blow it up so you can see it a little bit better. For me, the Ordinance Committee basically voted unanimously to support this. Andrew Hagerty is here this evening, and you can ask him specifically about his question, any questions you have. But essentially, this is what it comes down to. To build 4 additional units on this property, on the Emerald Green, these are rental units that we have in West Cumberland. Basically, they're full all the time because we have a tremendous need for rental units in our community. But to build 4 additional units here, there's a need for additional land. And the additional land would come from essentially the board barn property. And if you remember last time before the planning board, there was a different plan that basically had some development on this lot, and there were 3 or 4 house lots that were on Gray Road. None of that is on the table this time. Essentially, it is basically taking this 59,600 square foot of property and making it a part of Emerald Green. So this would be a transfer to Mr. Hagerty, and that would allow him to build these 4 units here. Think about it just for a second. The benefit the neighbors get is essentially a massive bunch of trees, a huge buffer that we could never have planted, and also at the same time on the table is the 15-foot drainage easement that the town would obtain that I explained in the initial application. Both of these things I think are good things when we look at the neighborhood. You know, as you can see, most of the homes are on, I'll say the southerly end, if I'm getting my directions somewhat right, and they won't see any new homes on Old Gray Road. The greatest impact obviously would be to this individual, but essentially there would be no development on Old Gray Road except for the day that when we reconstruct this and blast out some of the ledge in the hill, we'll need drainage, and this will be the drainage path we'll use. So the request tonight is essentially to allow this zone here to change from VCC to a VOC1, which allows for multiplex developments. The VCC does not, the VOC does, and that's all that would be required. I think, I thought the last application was good. I think this application is probably better. The last application received no support at the town planning board. I think this application has a better chance because of the non-development of this lot. With this, I think one of the questions that Mike Eads would ask, and Mike Eads has spoken to the developer to answer his questions and get his concerns addressed, is well, if we do this, aren't we losing commercial land? Yes, we are. We're losing 56,000 square feet, but there still is the ability to build right in this footprint right here. This footprint, remember, if you remember from the old drawings, half of this is wetlands. So half of this can't be built on to begin with anyway. So what are we really losing? Not much in the front on the Route 100 portion, because nothing could be built here. The real question is, we have still 40,000 square feet remaining that still can be built on in the rest of the lot. So with all that said, I think this was pretty quick. George or Shirley could jump in, that the Ordinance Committee said, I think in your words, George, this was a no-brainer, and let's just, let's move on to
That
the
was
next
me.
item. Or that was you. Well, one of you guys said it. It seemed pretty simple. It was hard to pull out what could possibly be wrong with this. And I think I share in the excitement of the Ordinance Committee. I think this is a good thing. It's a win for the neighborhood. It protects the neighborhood, but it also gives us, 4 more units of rental housing, which as soon as they're built, they'll be full. So I'm excited about that. And if you've seen the quality of work that's done out there, it's top shelf. It's a nice job. These are nice units, and they will rent very quickly. So Andy is here if you have any questions for him, but I'd be happy to answer any questions related to the process. So tonight, the Ordinance Committee is asking the full council to send this to the Planning Board. They have to have a public hearing, and they have to make a recommendation to you whether they think it's a good idea, a bad idea, or they should, or that any modification to the application should be made. They don't get to vote it up or down, only you get to do that. If the vote comes back negative with some other ideas or conditions, you can deliberate on that, but ultimately what you are sending them is what's before you tonight and what's in your packet.
Thanks, Bill.
One other thing to note, because
Counsel?
I know it's going to
Yes.
come up. These are one-bedroom units that he was talking about, so the impact to schools are unlikely.
Good point. I'm Andy Hagerty. That was one thing that Bill didn't speak on. They're one-bedroom, first-floor units. And for some background, in 2013, when I built these, they're two-story, and basically the living space is upstairs, and I had some senior tenants that moved in, lived there for like 6 years. They were on the waiting list for like 4 years in Cumberland to get one-floor living, and it took them that long. And I said, geez, maybe we could do something here. So it would be 4 one-bedroom, first floor, no steps, no stairs, nothing, right, walk in, walk out with a garage in each one. So that's important. I think it's, obviously, if they're on the list for over 4 years, that's a problem. Thanks for pointing that out. But Bill did a great job talking about what I want to do. It does go from commercial to commercial, though. We're not losing any commercial space here, like in the last go-around. It's commercial land to commercial land. So I think it's a win for everybody. I think so.
Thank you, Andy.
But what essentially would happen, because of restrictions on the amount of buildable, amount of footprint you can put on a particular size, you're limited. It still stays commercial, but because he's maxed out the buildable space, then that section that belongs to the board barn stays undeveloped.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I have one procedural where I can't remember if we actually voted or if we were voting to send it to ordinance. The notice, we were expanding the notice distance, right? Is that, would we be going off of that for noticing of?
So the council doesn't notice people, only by public notices.
Yeah.
Right, it's the planning board. The
Yeah.
planning board notice has not been approved to 500 feet yet.
Okay.
It's, I have encouraged staff to do that.
Okay.
The ordinance still only requires 200 feet, but we are noticing at 500 feet for planning board meetings.
Perfect, thank you.
This is a public discussion. Do we have anybody from the public that wants to talk on this subject? Andy, thank you. Appreciate it. Any further questions by the council? Do we have a motion?
I'll give you a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks,
I move to forward to the planning board for a public hearing and recommendation a zone change request for Michael Record and Andrew Hagerty to change a portion of map U20, lot 66 from VCC zone, Village Center Commercial, to VOC1, Village Office Commercial 1 zone as recommended by the Ordinance Committee.
Second.
Okay, we got a first, we got a second by George. Any further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda, thank you. The next item is to hold a public hearing to consider an act on an amendment to the credit enhancement agreement with an Integrative Health Center of Maine to add 15 Skyview View Holdings LLC. Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Finance Committee has reviewed this and recommends this change. Essentially, it's a credit enhancement agreement that was given to Dr. McCloy. And when he built his beautiful building, he was able to get a tenant for the first floor, and part of their negotiation was to split essentially the credit enhancement agreement. From a procedural matter, it does require the council to endorse that and to vote on that so that we can separate the documents, and each will receive a credit enhancement agreement once the property bills are paid. So we're pretty comfortable with it. The assessor has set it up such that it can happen. Our issue tonight is just council approval to divide the credit enhancement agreement.
Thanks, Bill. Any further questions?
I read through this whole thing, Bill, and I didn't, I missed it. What is the life of this agreement?
Great question, Bob. Credit enhancement agreements have typically been set up that they would go for 20 years or $500,000, whichever comes first. So in their case, it would be $250 each. So $250,000 of taxes over 20 years would be the cap. And then after that, it would, they would no longer be eligible for that agreement.
And how many years are we into this?
This was the first year. So coming up, it'll be the first year under the new agreement, would be the September tax bill. So this past year, it all went to Dr. McCloy because this wasn't divided, and he had to figure out what to do. The owners of the properties would like to be consistent with what their agreement was, and that's why they came forward. So
Good question.
that was a great question. Sorry, I should have explained that.
Ron?
Just a question, Bill. Let's say 10 years down the road, he decides to sell the bottom floor. Will it automatically be transferred to the new owner, or would they have to come back, or would it go back to Dr. McCoy?
No, it is transferable. They're
Okay.
allowed to sell and move forward, and that's part of the credit enhancement
Okay.
agreement. It's assignable, essentially.
Any other questions? This is a public hearing. Anybody from the public? Seeing none, I would close the public hearing and ask for a motion.
I'll give you a motion.
George?
I move to amend the credit enhancement agreement with Integrative Health Center of Maine to add 15 Skyview Holdings LLC.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Bob, second. Further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda. Thank you. The next item is to appoint a member of the Planning Board and Cumberland Housing Authority. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, George, myself, and Tom met, and we interviewed 7 different people for a planning board seat. And we had a lot of qualified candidates, so it wasn't an easy job, but we got through it all. And I would like to make a motion. I move to appoint Lorraine Raden and Amanda Billings to the Planning Board and Cara Biddings to the Cumberland Housing Authority.
We have a second?
Second.
George, thank you. Any further discussion?
It's a 3-year term.
Yes. I don't know about the housing authority, that might be, would that be 3, Bill?
I believe so. I think we're replacing a member who's termed out.
Okay.
Any further discussion by the council? All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda. Thank you, Ron. The next item is to authorize the code enforcement officer to execute a consent agreement with the owners of 273 Middle Road. Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a unique situation, primarily because it happens between two towns. And the one town being the town of Cumberland, where the infraction occurs, and the second town being the town of Yarmouth. This is a property that's located on a Stilby Lane, which is in Yarmouth. A Stilby Lane runs off of Portland Street, which is our middle road, if you will. So this is very close to main line fence. It's almost directly across the street as you go up a little bit toward Yarmouth to kind of give you an idea where it's at. The other thing is that it's located down a Stilby Lane, and I'm going to zoom into the property. So here you see the garage, and here you see the shed. Now, the setback line is a little bit odd because basically this property is essentially a landlocked piece of property and a piece of land in Cumberland. And when it's a landlocked property, there's no fronts. There's only sides. So essentially, the setback violation occurs right at this little point that I'm pointing to right there. And sheds are supposed to be 15 feet back from any sideline. This shed functions more as kind of a pool utility house because there's a in-ground swimming pool in here as well. The planning board in Yarmouth gave approval for that. We basically didn't have any disagreements, but the shed was located about 4 feet too close to, maybe it's a little bit more to this property line. So the action before you tonight is to basically allow for the encroachment to exist and to pay the $500 fine, which is typical for legal fees for our town attorney who has reviewed this document to basically cover those costs. These are typically, I don't know, we have probably close to a dozen of these a year, and they are encroachment on property lines. They're not over somebody else's property. They just encroach a setback distance. What the code officer has recommended to you tonight is that you focus on this. The abutter in the front properties will testify, and I'll allow him to basically do his own testimony, but there were some other agreements that I think that the Yarmouth Planning Board might have gotten into, but the town of Cumberland, our ordinance is basically limited to this setback requirement. So I just wanted to share that with you, that I didn't want this to kind of go down the road of a planning board review. So that's where I'm at. The code officer has reviewed this. The town attorney has reviewed this. I have reviewed this. We're all in agreement that this is the right way to go. Mr. Libby, the owner of the property in the front, was given a copy of that and was told about this meeting tonight because a lot of this just happened in the last few days. Ed Libby is here tonight, and I'm sure he'll have additional things that happen. I mean, what was happening with this property out front is a kind of an interesting story that we supported. We thought he was going down the right path, but things kind of turned on him, and it didn't work out the way he had hoped that it would work out. So for tonight's action, we're focusing strictly on the shed and the setback, and that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? It's a public discussion. Anybody from the public?
Hello, I'm David Goldman. I'm here on behalf of the Vayus, the owner of the property. some of what I was going to say, Bill has already covered. I guess one of the things I would like to focus on is how long ago the events that are the key to what happened here occurred. It was back in 2008, as I understand it, that the Vayus were given permission to essentially build what they built. At the time, they worked hand in glove with the code enforcement officer who knew what was happening. I don't think we necessarily agree that there was a violation, which is not unusual when you're reaching a consent agreement. But whatever there was, it was there was cooperation at the time with the code enforcement officer. There was cooperation at the time with Mr. Libby's predecessor in interest, who knew exactly what was happening and had no problem with it. There are appeal deadlines for actions that you disagree with. They're pretty short. I'm not sure what they are here, 30 days, 45 days?
30 days.
Whatever it is, it's not 12 years later. Essentially, Mr. Libby is trying to raise an issue regarding something that occurred more than a decade ago that everyone knew about, nobody had a problem with anywhere near the time. No one appealed from it in a timely fashion. No one has appealed from it since then. And it only came up now that the Vayus are on the verge of closing on the sale of their property. And Mr. Libby files an affidavit in a registry of deeds that puts a cloud on the title saying there's a violation, something that someone should have objected to 12 years ago if they thought that was a problem. And so, that's just by way of saying that time is of the essence to a certain extent here. The Vayus are supposed to close on Friday. They can't close until this issue is resolved, because even if the buyers wanted to go forward and just deal with the cloud on the title, their lender wouldn't allow them to. So we're asking the town council to basically put to rest again an issue which everyone thought was put to rest more than a decade ago at this point. We just want to get this resolved. The town to take the position that whatever the problems might have been 10, 12 years ago, it's not a problem from the town's perspective now. It doesn't intend to penalize my clients or any of their successors in interest so that they can close on the sale of their property like they thought there was going to be no issue doing that and move forward. Like Bill, I suspect that I gather just from looking through some of the correspondence on this that there are a lot of tangential, at best, issues that are going to be brought forward. Obviously, this town has no authority or no interest in talking about what's happening over in the town of Yarmouth or what the town of Yarmouth might or might not do. This town council has no authority to resolve boundary dispute issues that might arise between the parties. The only issue before the town council, and the only issue that's properly before the town council, is whether or not there's some chance the town is going to seek to penalize the Vayus or a successor in interest for this alleged violation that occurred 12 years ago. And that's what we're trying to put to rest here today. So I'm happy to answer all kinds of questions regarding any thorny legal issues that might arise, because that's what I'm interested in as a lawyer. But I doubt any of you are interested in going through that in detail. But if any of those issues arise, I'm happy to talk about them. Thanks.
Ed, do you have anything?
You can move that around too, and that mouse is, you can move that around so you can get in the picture if you'd like to show more of the property.
Does this work? No. Okay, thank you. Can I take this off? So I appreciate the opportunity to come in and comment as a neighbor. Bill wasn't quite correct. I'm in process of trying to put a workforce housing unit on the property next door. That's in process. It hasn't ended. Scheduled for the 27th. That's not directly related to...
Can you identify yourself?
I'm sorry, I'm Ed Libby. I'm the owner of the property
Thank
next
you,
door. Why doesn't this show up?
There it is.
Anyway, so just a little quick background. When I bought the property, I had the survey done. I wasn't aware necessarily of the shed encroachment, but what was clear was that Mr. Vaya was part of his construction and shed and pool and all those things. he had actually built his lawn well into my property, and the surveyor showed that. And I simply made a call and said, you know, hey, this is what's happened. Here's the map. Keep mowing your lawn. It's not a big deal. It's a very strange coincidence that at the very same time that I'm trying to do my efforts with the planning board, he put his property up for sale, and that created some confusion about what was going on each side for a little while. And I support this mechanism. I think it's the best mechanism to solve the shed problem, but from my perspective, there's a couple other things that are going on. I'm not a lawyer. But I'm not intimidated that the email that came through had 5 lawyers on it, 4 from his side and the town, because it's a simple neighbor-to-neighbor issue. There are a couple of the things that Mr. Veu, as part of that project, and I wish I could show this, but has not observed. One of them, the entire, just to give some background, the entire piece, if you see that, the town line coming down and across, what sort of got this whole thing going was that the piece below that, the entire piece of land in Cumberland at the time that the Astilbe Lane subdivision was approved, there was a note on the plan that said nothing could be built in the Cumberland portion of that property, which was fine. And Mr. Veu, at some point in the past, came to Cumberland, and he got that note amended, which is fine. The amendment said that he could put the pool and the pool shed there, and then the rest of it had to stay undeveloped and in a natural state. So what happened, though, if you look at, and I'm not going to go through it all, but if somebody wants to look at the detail, the sketch that he provided showed the pool shed being up close to the pool, and if you were to draw a line, it was clearly on the inside of, if you drew a straight line from the, but that's not the garage, where it says garage, it was on the inside of it and clearly away from the boundary where it should be. But in reality, when it got built, for whatever reason, it didn't happen that way. But the other part of it up above is this surround. The pool's up high and then it comes down. But there's a 20-foot buffer between our properties that extends from the Cumberland town line up to the front. And that was also a natural buffer to be left in its natural state. And what's ended up happening over time is Mr. Veu came and planted a buffer, but he planted it on my property, or my predecessor's property, entirely. So there's a bunch of trees out there, and then he's maintained a lawn in that entire 20-foot area where it should be a buffer. It's on the edge of the subdivision. That's the way it was designed. That's the way it was approved. Well, then this thing's sort of just unraveling in the last few weeks and learning more all the time. It turns out that the 20-foot buffer just comes right by the edge of the house here, and it comes all the way down into here. And it turns out, looking at it now, that the pool, part of the pool and the pool surround is also inside the buffer area. I don't care about all that. I don't know whose responsibility it is, whether Yarmouth joined in when that amendment was given, whether Yarmouth had the permit for the actual thing. There was a permit I saw in the Yarmouth file, and there was a permit maybe in Cumberland too. I'm not sure, but the pool is literally half the pool's in Yarmouth and half the pool's in Cumberland. What I'm asking for this consent agreement is to once and for all, I think in a similar effort, is to really put this all to rest, but I think that it needs to have a couple small pieces added to it. I'm asking for it to say that in the area below the pool, where it says it should not be mowed and it should be in a natural state, that is in fact what should be going on there. What's happened is it's become a giant hockey rink each winter, and it's manicured and mowed. It's a giant thing. I wish I could show you the aerial. But that area should be put back into a natural state. And then I'm asking for the same thing, somehow for this consent agreement to say the same thing. I'm not asking him to move the pool or move the fences or do anything, but what I'm asking is that he stop mowing that and be put back to the natural state, which is what it says it should be to begin with. That's what I'm asking for, that's all. Well, I would love for him to actually plant some trees on his property to later on allow me to use my property rather than where the trees are that he put on my property. If whatever development happens on mine within Yarmouth, there's a big strip of it now that he's sort of occupied. He's not occupying it, but he put those trees there. So it's really straightforward. I want his sale to close on Friday, if at all possible, but I don't want the person that buys it for us to have to come back here some other time or fiddle around in Yarmouth. There are these little issues that I think are very simple to address in this document with a couple of sentences, and we can all go home and everybody will sell their property, buy their property, and we can all go home. So that's all that I'm looking for. I hope that we can do something like that, because if we don't, then the issue, one out of those three issues gets resolved tonight, not all three of them. Thanks.
Thanks, Ed. Bill, can we do any of that?
No.
I didn't think so.
Most of those are homeowner issues, and more with the town of Yarmouth than with the town of Cumberland. And Bill said it's essentially that the issue that the council really needs to deal with is the setback issue. That's what's before you. The other are approvals that the code officer of Yarmouth would need to address, or the town of Yarmouth in particular.
Ed?
So I forgot to say that, because I did come in to see Bill as soon as I could, and I left his office, and that's what he said. Well, this is really about the shed. But then I read the consent agreement, and it clearly says in 2 paragraphs that it's about the pool and the pool surround and the shed. So I would be happy if it's about the shed and that's it, that we take out those words and that's what it's about. Or if somehow we're trying to address something that literally is half in each town, that this consent agreement, if Cumberland has no authority in Yarmouth, that actually say that Cumberland's not going to take any action for that portion of the pool that lays in Cumberland. You still have this issue with what's going on in Yarmouth, and that's where the infraction happens. I think it would be cleaner if what they're saying is, if the shed is the issue we're trying to address, to take out the pool and take out the pool surround.
So is this more not semantic, but like when you're saying surround in this agreement, it's the hardscape surround, correct?
I've got a picture if it would help.
No, I can see in the picture, like I see what you're referencing. I'm more the language in the actual consent agreement is referring to the hardscape surround. Like I can see clearly the pool itself and the shed are all part of a cement. Or stone or something.
Consent agreement. Consent agreement. And, that's fine. One of those is fine. They're all, well, not that one. Well, that shows the pool. The other one right above it, yeah. No, damn.
Anything else?
Hold on. Try that one. No, that's a subdivision plan. The ice, do the ice rink one. Ice rink one above, right there. Okay. Then we'll go back to the first one. Well,
That didn't come out so good.
they just want to see the pool, that's fine, great. So if I'll walk up here. The buffer basically, down, right, just barely missed the house, and down into the pool here, and then across, and the corner pin on that survey is the shed. Back, you can see the rest of this big back.
Where this is going.
So I would deflect to Dave about the pool issue. I think it was more housekeeping, just to incorporate everything into it. Remember, they own both lots, so we would typically look at it as one property and not get into the pool and so forth.
I do have a question. How big is their property in Cumberland? How big is that triangular piece? It looks fairly large.
I can
Where?
tell you in a minute. That's what
Okay.
I'm trying to get to our GIS.
I could have looked it up on the property card probably myself, but
Just trying to get to a better photo of the just trying to get to a better photo of the property, because the one, especially at home, was all whitewashed out, and folks could definitely not see it, so.
I don't need you to answer my question. I looked it up. The piece of property in Cumberland is 12/100ths, or just over 1/10 of an acre.
That's a mistake. No, that's not right. I actually, it's an
If it's bigger than that, then you're getting a bargain on your taxes.
I pointed that out to.
Because it says land, the area is 0.12 acres.
I think it's about an acre.
So this is the parcel right here, and 1.23 acres, according to
Point
our
what?
tax. 1.23, 1.25 acre almost, this parcel right here.
That makes sense.
But the parcel that we tax them on in Cumberland is 0.12 acres.
No.
That sounds like it's a
That's what it is on
decimal
his
point
property
that's off.
card.
If you look at that, you can see that that's
I know.
about an acre.
Well, that's what I'm looking at, and it says
Okay,
0.12
that's, we
acres.
can deal with that tomorrow, but
No,
this is the
1.2.
property right here.
typo, Shirley. Like instead of
it should be 1.2.
someone typed 0.1.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's nothing around it, there's 1.2.
So it's
Um,
1.2 acres?
1.2 acres, and this is you won't see property lines here because this is Yarmouth. This is Cumberland. The red shown on the drawing is Cumberland, so this is all within their property, and this unfortunately is shown on our tax records. And as Ed showed, that there was I would just call it a survey bust in the line that basically showed two lines there. One was the survey line, and one was what was shown on the tax map. So the survey line is the more accurate, which has this shed about, we figured it was somewhere around 4 or 5 feet into the setback. So again, this lot only has sides. It has no front or rear. So it is a peculiar issue to have, for sure.
Yes, our property cards show the two towns' property being the same size as the Vayu property, 0.12 and 0.12. Sorry to say your taxes are going up on the Vayu property.
He doesn't know that.
I just want to, briefly address a couple of these issues. I mean, most of them are essentially beside the point for today. I mean, whatever the case may be with the tax card, the property is what it is. I think it's correct, it's 1.2 acres or so. Be that as it may, there's some talk about this buffer zone. We're not quite sure where this idea is coming from. There's supposed to be a buffer zone, but again, it's completely irrelevant to what we're talking about today, whether it's a buffer zone or not a buffer zone or anything related to the buffer zone. All we're talking about is the pool, the surrounding part, and the shed. And just on the issue of what the meaning of the word surround is, because now we're getting into my wheelhouse as a lawyer looking at language. It says that we're asking the town of Cumberland to take no further enforcement action regarding the swimming pool surrounding the shed. The very next paragraph talks about the swimming pool surrounding the shed shall be allowed to remain and be replaced in their current location. No expansion of any of the aforementioned improvements shall be made. And clearly, that's referring to the pool, like the paved area around the pool, the shed. We're not accidentally saying that no enforcement action can ever be taken in some other context. We're just talking about this one specific issue that was resolved 12 years ago, and that is only now, on the virtual eve of my client selling their property, become an issue. And just, the boundary survey that Mr. Libby had done was done 4 years ago. Not that, again, that is not particularly relevant, but it goes to the idea this all is kind of an evolving situation that's come out of nowhere. From his perspective, it was resolved from our perspective and from the town's perspective 12 years ago. He had all the information he has now at minimum 4 years ago. There's just no reason to be bringing this up and throwing an entire land sale into chaos at this point. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Dave. Ed?
Just one quick question. Again, in fairness to someone who's going to pick up this document and read it, if you read what they're asking it to say, it sounds like you and them have the authority to say what's happening with half of that pool that sits in Yarmouth. So I think that you need to be clear for the people who are coming down the road. What are you talking about? Because maybe someone who wants to buy this property says, oh, I have a consent decree that says no matter what happens, Cumberland has said there's no action. But the fact is that Cumberland really only, either you have the authority to control what's in Cumberland, or you could maybe say something about what's going on in Yarmouth. But it's kind of like they're asking you to do both things. They're saying, well, Yarmouth doesn't matter, but then their language should be clear that half the pool's in Yarmouth and we haven't spoken to them yet, or something like that. I think it's important to signal to people who are going to read this exactly what it says and what it means, because if you don't clarify that, it could be misleading to someone who's reading it and relying on it.
Good.
We're good, okay. Oh,
I'll just make this extremely quick. There's just no question, no one would ever question whether you have the authority to bind the town of Yarmouth to do or not to do something. Obviously, the only thing you have control over, jurisdiction over, is what happens in Cumberland. I just don't think that's an issue. Anyone looking at this will understand that you're only talking about things that are happening in Cumberland. Thanks.
Steve. Ron?
Mr. Chairman, it looks to me like the only authority that we have is 4 or 5 foot encroachment in the town of Cumberland. What takes place in Yarmouth, we have no authority over.
That's correct.
So we're either here to deny or to agree with this, so I'm ready to make a motion whenever you are, so.
Right, we're taking the motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to authorize the code enforcement officer to execute a consent agreement with the owners of 273 Middle Road and to collect $500 for legal fees.
For a second?
Second.
Thanks, George. Further discussion?
Further discussion. So I've read through this, and I can sympathize with the owner of Two Frogs there, or what they, it's clear to me that the Villos did something they shouldn't have done.
Right.
And sort of part of me says we should punish them for what they did, and I don't think they've acted in good faith to correct the situation. And we're left making a decision based on recommendations from the town code enforcement officer. And so Roy's right. We're acting on what we have to act on, but the facts of the matter are the Villos. It's inconceivable that they didn't know when they planted those trees, whether that was the developer that did that. Somebody did that, somebody planted the trees on that piece of property that wasn't theirs. They built a shed that was on property that was not allowed. They mowed and used an area that was specifically called for in the plans to be kept wild. So if I vote for this, it certainly is with a bad taste in my mouth.
Any further discussion by the council?
I
Shirley?
agree with Bob. I'm going to go in favor of it, but it also, it's hard to ignore the affidavit, especially line .6, which says in their subdivision approval, which happened in Yarmouth, the portion of Lot 1 located within the town of Cumberland shall be left in its natural state and shall not be developed or built upon. And that was part of their subdivision approval.
They have no authority in Cumberland.
I understand that, but they did it anyway. And I don't know. I would like the property card corrected. They're being taxed for a very tiny piece of property, and their shed, which they got a permit for $4,000, is being assessed at $1,300. So I'd like that also corrected, because it's not less than that, probably. But I understand your point. We can only vote in Cumberland on Cumberland's issues. But
Further discussion? We have a motion and we have a second. All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda. Thank you. Next item is new business. Shirley?
thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with the good news. The Bicentennial Committee, we had a meeting last week that had to get canceled, but we're meeting again this coming Wednesday, and I would like to share some events that are forthcoming. So on March 8th, there will be a book launch, one of those history of the town of Cumberland sort of picture books that you see in other places, other towns when you go to visit, town of Cumberland. Town of Wiscasset, I've seen them. Town of Bath, I've seen that one. So that will be coming out, and it will be available for purchase at the Historical Society, the Town Hall, and the Prince Memorial Library. On March 21st, which is our actual birthday, there will be a kickoff, a launch of a bicentennial online exhibit that people have been working very diligently on. April 1st, there's going to be a scavenger hunt, and more details on that will be forthcoming, but it's an outside kind of scavenger hunt. There will be 10 Cumberland pines around town, and you will have to go and sort of find those 10 pine trees and learn a little bit more about the history of the town of Cumberland. The date for our biggest celebration has been set for September 18th at Twin Brooks, which will include a steeplechase and food and games, and the day will end with fireworks. And then October 31st, Halloween night, there will be a tour of Cumberland's cemeteries under the cover of night skies. So, and you'll get to learn about Cumberland's 200 years. So I wanted to share that with everyone. I saw pictures, and perhaps the manager can update us on this, but I saw that the steel beams have been removed from under the Historical Society building, and I took my mom for a drive around town, and she wanted to see that, so we did go see that, and it's coming along really nicely. I'm quite impressed, and I was wondering if the mild weather has helped us move things along in that. No. Okay.
Your idea of mild and
I was
moderate.
hopeful. And then the last thing I have to share with everyone goes back to those of us who've been here a while. On this past weekend, former Greeley teacher and basketball coach of his own legend and making, Bob Layton, who was a personal friend of mine, he passed away. He and his wife Margaret are living in Florida. Margaret was the secretary at Greeley Junior High School for as long as Tom Joyce was a principal, maybe even longer. Margaret was a Bolduc. She grew up here in Cumberland. She went to Greeley. She's my Aunt Pat's best friend. And so we've remained close over the years. And Bob was a legend, a really good man. He raised his family, his son Dennis and his daughter Susan and his son Greg all were Greeley graduates. We used to razz him, or my father mostly razzed him about being from Cape Elizabeth, that he had moved here from Cape Elizabeth where he grew up. But there will be plans to honor his life sometime this summer. I've heard from Margaret and the family that's in the plans for sometime this summer. So if anyone, I know that there's been some Facebook information on how to send a card to Margaret. She lives in the Villages. But if you need her address, I have it. Feel free to reach out to me. And that's all I have.
Bob?
So I just have one item. I was on the way home, I think it was last week, and a commentator on the radio said that all politics is local. And I forget what the rest of the conversation was or what the subject matter was, but I was struck by that phrase, and I got thinking about it, and as I drove home and contemplating the events of last week, I thought to myself, that's right. All politics is local. And so taking that phrase is to me is a battle cry for us as to how we conduct ourselves, because all politics is local. We need to set the tone for how this country operates. And it would be easy for me to say that we, the collective we, conduct ourselves, but I won't. I'm going to use the word I, but I believe it's we. I will conduct myself in a manner that brings honor to our community. I will conduct myself in a manner that is of a listening manner, collaborative manner, and when I don't win, I will compromise and I will support the actions of the majority. And sometimes that's not always not easy to do, but it's the right thing to do. And I think that this is what the community expects from us. And anyways, all politics is local. That's all I got.
Mr. Stiles, I think we all came to the Joyce's funeral, the council, and we miss her a lot. I know you miss her dearly. So your comment was very emotional for us, so thank you for that. Thank you. Mike Eads is on, his mother passed away, and so he's not here tonight. That's the reason he's not with us tonight. Also, the Community Development Block Grant, we need to, as a council, endorse for vet to vet. And we have, like Bill said, we have over 80 veterans in our community. So it's not costing us anything. It's just we're endorsing for the vet to vet, and that's all that is. So if we can have you okay on that, that'd be great. I'm seeing nods. Okay, it's terrific. Thank you. Also, Allison, maybe you can address Sean McVerity's question.
Sure. And I'd gladly, I think I addressed it. I actually shared what my personal understanding of what systemic racism was probably a few months ago. I think it came up early on in our conversations, and I don't express to be an expert on this topic, so I will put that disclaimer on it that this is my current understanding and how I am kind of explaining it to myself or folks that I'm talking to. And I'll start with systemic racism is not a comment on the people in the systems, right? I think I mentioned that early on.
Yes, you did.
That it is about the constructs of how we operate as a society. And that I think it's really unfortunate, actually, when folks take this whole discussion and turn it into an assumption that we're saying people are bad or good. And that is not what I am saying. And I also don't think that's what the definition of systemic racism is either. That it's not saying that the people in the system, that people that are police officers, because they are in a system that may have constructs that foster unconsciously a bias or a discrimination, that they are bad. So I think that's really important to understand. That's my perspective on this. And so when I talk about systemic racism, when I talk about constructs, I'll use my own experience. My parents worked really hard to buy their first house and saved their money and moved my sister and I to a town that was up and coming, much like Cumberland, and did it for the school system. That was their goal. And that school system was really great, and it fostered, and more professionals moved in, and it was the community we grew up in. So fast forward, getting into high school, I'm thinking about college, and my parents are like, we don't got a lot of money for you to go to college, so your options are scholastic scholarship, athletic scholarship, or you're paying your way for a good chunk and taking on those loans. Now, I really enjoy athletic pursuits, and I was a soccer player, but that stopped early. So athletic was out, and as I've expressed, I'm a financial brain, and so really quickly I said, okay, taking on those loans is not going to work either. So academic scholarship was my eye on the prize. That's how I was going to go to schools and have the opportunity to go to schools that I wanted to go to. So I worked my butt off in school, and I got really good grades and was in the top percentile of my class. And I applied to schools, and I got into where I wanted to go. But what got me, and I really do believe, got me the full tuition scholarship that allowed me to go to the school that I did, that allowed me to build the network that I have, that allowed me to pursue the career I want, that in our community is valued in a way that allows me to pursue the life I have, is because of the network I had in the town that I grew up in. And that it was knowing and having a neighbor that was the sister of the president of admissions for a college that I happened to want to go to, that gave me the extra edge. And I really feel like that is the perfect example of the system constructs, that networking is what gets you over the edge to go to college. Networking is what gives you that recommendation for your first employer. And if those networks that we have and the communities that we live in are purposely keeping some people out, again, purposely in a way that those constructs were built centuries ago, that's what we're talking about. And we're talking about just taking a step back and saying, do we today, and what we understand, still like that and feel that that's right? That's all that I'm asking us to do as a community, and that's what the Social Justice Committee, in my opinion, is really trying to do, is take that deep breath and take that step back and say, wow, I didn't realize that those were the implications of our actions, of our policies. Because at the end of the day, I didn't see it at the time. I didn't think that I was getting an unfair advantage through the network that I had. It just was. It was what I knew. It was my community. And so I use that as an example to say, and I don't sit here and think I'm a bad person. I just take that step back and say, that's an example of how the system works and how the system may disadvantage some people and advantage others. And those others that are advantaged happen to be white more often than not in our society today.
Thank you, Allison.
My explanation.
George?
Well, I want to first join Shirley in offering my condolences to Margaret Layton. I played basketball for Bob Layton. He was a very good man. He was one of the first owners of Valhalla. He did a lot for this community. He was a wonderful defensive coach, and he was a lousy offensive coach. I've wanted to say that for years, and I know Margaret would probably forgive me for it. Having said that, on the subject of systemic racism, I have to address something because Bob Vail was kind enough to give me a book for our Christmas time offerings, and I've read about half of it. And I've been a broker for 40 years, as a lot of people know, real estate broker. And I think a good construct, the name of the book is Color of Law, and I can't even remember the author's name at the moment. But he pounds and pounds and pounds on one aspect of American society that's been true since the 1800s, and that is housing. And the bottom line is everything that is substantiated in his assertions in this book. And from the Tennessee Valley Authority around World War II back into the 1800s, there was it was a very conscious effort on the government's part to keep segregation in place, to segregate blacks and whites. And the way they did it was controlling the ability of people of color to get loans, and they outright outlawed in many government housing communities. They outlawed people of color to be even allowed to get into those communities. So the construct, as Allison puts it, or the framework of racism and systemic racism within our government goes to that core. I mean, what more important right do we have than to own our own homes and to develop our own communities along that line? And unfortunately, people of color never had that opportunity, even past World War II. Now, having said that, when I hear Allison talk about whether she needs to feel guilty about whether she got a scholarship or any of us have to feel guilty, I say to myself, well, the progress in my lifetime since the 60s has been phenomenal as far as leveling the playing field or attempting to, including when I was in college, extra years of college were offered, and various programs have attempted to right that governmental wrong, which still exists. So the idea that there isn't systemic racism is nonsense. But at the same time, we talk about bias as another negative. Well, bias isn't negative. Bias can be positive. We have experiences in life, and our experiences dictate our biases. And some of those experiences give us a good bias in favor of certain things. And we also experience biases that bring out the worst in us. But to say bias in itself is a bad word, it's not. But that's part of what concerns some people, especially those of us that are getting older, about the whole cancel culture phenomenon of trying to dictate to people what we should think certain words mean and certain words don't mean. But the idea that there's systemic racism, anybody who reads the book, The Color of Law, and I have a law degree, and I've never looked at it on that angle. And that's a biased angle, which is very, very enlightening. So let's most of us step back, as Allison says, and evaluate our positions going forward. That's all I have.
Ron?
Last week I forgot my wallet at home, Mr. Stiles, so this week I'm making up for it. And our friend Dean has actually made a $20 donation too, so he's a very generous guy from the community. Couple other things. In 1977, I entered Greeley High School, and Bob Layton had a class which I signed up for, which was General Math 2. And it was, without a doubt, the best math class that I ever took in my life. When I signed up for that class, he says, okay, he says, I want everybody to write down what time it is. And when the class ended, he says, all right, I want everybody to write down what time it is. And at the end of the week, you had a time card. And at the end of the week, you got paid. And at the end of the semester, you actually had to file a tax return for the amount of money that you made in that class. And we actually filed our tax returns. I mean, he taught us some practical math that I still use today. And he was just a genuine good guy. I mean, Greg was in my class, and I remember that class like it was yesterday. And back then, Bob Layton was younger than I am now. So he was just a genuine great guy. He really was a good teacher. And my condolences to Mike. He's lost his mom. And I feel for you, Mike. And you've been a good friend, too, over the years. And Allison, don't ever feel like you have to defend yourself, because you don't. You're a good person. The majority of this town elected you to this position for a reason. I mean, so I don't ever want any of us to think that we have to defend our actions, because we don't. We're all truly good people, and we're here for a reason, for the greater good of this community. That's all I have.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Town manager?
Just a couple of things. Those of you who know this person will understand the meaning, but I was talking to Chris Bolduc last night about the passing of Bob Layton, who I honestly didn't know very well. I knew who he was, but I never met him. And Chris said the best way I can describe him to you, Bill, is he was the Bill Landis before Bill Landis. He was the guy that everybody knew. He was the ambassador of town. He was the person that, you know, if you mentioned his name, everybody knew the guy. Everybody had a family connection to him, and that's the best way. And it was a great way, and I think it's a great tribute. Bill and I are still friends, and I got it instantly when he explained it that way. Bill was our former rec director many years ago, and left a legacy that is a challenge to fill, because he gave his heart and soul to the town of Cumberland, as did Bob. You know, and I think it's part of the DNA of Cumberland. I mean, all our rec directors, Peter Bingham Jr. included, is just somehow they just are here 24/7, and they never stop, and they've always given 100% to the town.
Well, you look, it goes from Ron up through the decades to George.
I know. Sitting here, it was amazing when he said, he was your basketball coach?
And I was
this
in
the
there.
guy from the story that I heard about the basketball game for the last 4 council years? So I'm laughing. I'm going, oh my gosh, that's the guy? So I wish I had a chance to meet him. So it's amazing, Shirley, that it is, you know, passed on to on. And it's great that, you know, you guys sharing those stories, because I think that's what's unique about this community, is that we do
He
care.
may have been the last surviving owner of Valhalla before it went public.
Yeah, I
he
think
was
so.
one of the founders. He
There
might
were
have.
4, Tubby Hilton, Bob Layton, and who else?
Bob
Bill, you
Darling.
know.
Bob Darling.
Bob Darling.
Higgins, Dave Higgins.
Dave Higgins, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, all great people. Man,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
If
So-
I recall, it was in Bob Layton's class that Bruce Bailey fell through the ceiling and sat down in the back chair in the back of the room, and nobody noticed.
And the wives' tales grow. So I did want to share a couple of other things. I'm not gonna wreck anybody's thunder, but it's really important you circle your calendar for March 22nd, because Steve Moriarty will be here. Something very special for the community. So please, if you don't watch any other meeting all year, March 22nd is the meeting to watch.
Is that a town council meeting?
It is a council meeting that everybody will be wanting to see. The other thing I just would ask this council, I do have one more item after this, is I would ask that you make a motion to approve the endorsement of the vet-to-vet program as the CDB, as part of the CDBG grant coming up before Cumberland County. I think it's really important that we basically put it on the record that the council endorses the vet-to-vet program as part of the upcoming CDBG program. And I'll stop for a second and let you deliberate if you decide you want to do that.
Ron?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the vet-to-vet program.
Thank you, Ron. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Bob. All in favor? Unanimous, Brendan.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Bob.
I think it carries a lot of weight when there's a actual council vote behind it versus a consensus thing. So thank you for doing that. The next meeting, Chris Bolduc will be here, the Assistant Town Manager, to lead you through the meeting. This way you don't have to throw me out of the room when you do my evaluation or revaluation, whatever you want to call it. So I will be probably watching the meeting, but the ironic thing, it's like my first anniversary in 17 years that I've had council meetings on that I didn't have to come to this one. So I'm actually pretty excited, as is my wife. So thank you for that. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr.
I have one
Manager.
final thing.
Yes.
The score of the Alabama-Ohio game is tied at 7-7.
Aha.
Oh,
I just
Clemson's
looked
not
it up
playing this
before my
year?
computer died.
No Clemson?
It's too soon, Tom, too soon, too soon. And Brenda does have something for you, so please don't leave tonight without getting some, oh, she already have it.
Yes,
So don't
Brendan's
leave it
already
there.
passed this out for us, and we have our homework.
Yeah.
So it's Bill's evaluation, and we need to turn it in by the 20th. Is this correct? Okay. So we will, and thank you for that. Any further discussion? Do we have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Shirley?
Second.
Second, Bob. All in favor? Adjourned. Thank you.